Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to today's episode. All right. So, let's get into it. Concepts are inner events. I found that to be a fascinating statement, and I felt it deserves to be spoken about. You see, before I begin, in the subtitle, I've written Hidden Commands of a Universal Mind. And when you look at a human being is defined by its objective relationships, the relationship between one has between an object and another object, and a relationship one has between one subject and other subjects, and also the different relationship between an object and a subject, and they taking turns being cause and effect. What that means is something physically can move, something objective could happen, and then subjects can arise. Or something subjective could happen, and then objects can move. Suddenly, there is this idea, the inventor sees a vision. Let's say you're Edison and you see the light bulb, and you suddenly bring about that subject, causes you to change the object, okay, the objective realm. When I say concepts are inner events, because since 2014, gone on. I started this journey of these talks. I've become, just in general, very mindful of how a subject moves an object and how an object moves the subject, and how there are various relationships, and we have been kind of duped by our own primitive conditioning to not realize that the world is much more multidimensional than how we see it in one moment. It's as if, like, if you look at your own sight, your own intelligence as a human being, has your intelligence been the same since the beginning, or has it changed? And when you look at what has changed, it has been identification with the objective and the subjective. Your physical body is different. You have a different objective relationship. You're the subject, the who you see yourself. Every time a person blows a candle cake, that's a subjective change. So when the human being is aware of the subject before the object, we call that consciousness. When the human being is aware of the object before the subject, life is happening unconsciously. It's like matter is moving you. Many times in my life where I've lost control, or I couldn't handle something, or there was something to the moment, it was a transformation. And a transformation means that a way you're identifying with a subject as an object is changing. I feel where each human being is living two lives, an inner life and an outer life, and the supremacy of our awareness is that the inner life and the outer life are kind of the dimensions of the self. An inner event. Imagine, let's start from an outer event first. Let's first look at that. An outer event, you're walking in the street, you're like, wait a minute, is that a tsunami? And you start running. Okay, there's the outer event, and the outer realm is moving quicker than the inner realm. But when your inner realm moves quicker than your outer realm, you feel you are faster than the moment. Spirituality, I find the whole concept was that people began to see that there was an awareness to their sight that wasn't in sight. Awareness is a very crucial thing, because the human intelligence is self-awareness. That means when you think about it, you are the center of your universe, and once you are defined, you get access, and once your own individuality is molded, psychologists say, I don't know, about what is it, by the age of like from 11 to 15 or something, like 12, like in that time, the child becomes an individual to itself. The moment it becomes an individual, it starts perceiving that relationship, that pattern recognition model within others. You know, that means imagine you are a painter, and when you see and speak to others, your mind wonders if they can paint. Do you know? Right now, as I'm speaking, if the title of this talk is true, it means there's an inner event occurring. And if we were to look at this event, an event is something that it tends to be a person required to be there. That means it's like if a tree falls in the forest, did it fall if there was no one there? Ludwig Wittgenstein has this very nice quote. He says, philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language. And if we really look at life, it started to be program like when we could identify separate points. I feel that underneath all our psychology, there is a basic axiomatic acknowledgement of arithmetic and mathematical language. And so, really, what is happening to experience is that it's feeling that dimensions are being added, dimensions are being taken away, and even in certain extreme cases, for example, like the mystics and the yogis, they could find a evaluation to their mind. You know, it's what that means. That zero evaluation. It means that characterhood has to do with spectrumhood. And what that means is you really can't have characteristics unless you can move in different ways. That means if me and you, and let's say all the listeners to this talk, we were in this advanced room and we were trying to design the next kind of humanoid looking robot and try to kind of design a robot to kind of behave. This robot, in order for it to have characteristics, that means it must have access to different senses of its own character in different environments. What that would realistically mean is that as this robot, imagine me and you design, and everybody listening, we design together, this robot, in every environment it goes, it has to consider the environment. The mind of man, when it comes to the inner realm, is so sophisticated and so fascinating that it can ignore the environment. And so I kind of got shocked by the concept of ignorance, because I'm like, how can intelligence not process everything that it has access to? You know, Wittgenstein has this quote. He says, a man will be imprisoned in a room with a door that's unlocked and opens inwards as long as it does not occur to him to pull rather than push. That means if you're in a room that the door only opens inwards and you keep pushing, you'll never open the door and you feel the door can never open. And I find the materialistic perspective upon this world is simply trying to just push the world open, constantly trying to see higher dimensions beyond the dimensions we see now. But it's like this kind of mystical, I guess, remembrance of realizing, what if you are in a higher dimension? What if the door opens inwards? What if there was a kind of hidden meaning to that quote by Rumi, where he said, I have lived on the edge of insanity, on the lip of insanity, wanting to know reasons, knocking on a door. The door opens. I've been knocking from the inside, a sort of confirmation of a multidimensionally collective being. You see, pretty much human beings, they could either go towards infinite action or they could go towards void being. And I feel all knowledge is divided between this kind of polarity. That when you look at it, ideas that we value, they are moving towards bringing the new forth, and ideas that we don't value, they seem to be taking what is valuable now away. Do you know, that's why there is the set concept of justice. That's why the human being has a sort of inbuilt morality that comes from the ecosystem. I remember I was talking to a friend and we were discussing morality. And so it was, this friend of mine was in some sense under the impression that it's as if a person can always be in the right way all the time, 24/7. As if, imagine you, based on a standard of one moment, feel that every moment is that standard. Now that's possible. You know, it can be done. You can enter many different rooms still acting as if it's all one room. But I feel that there's a good question here, that where was our morality as a species? What was it defined by before we had language? Before we had language, I mean, we say we were animals, but we were savage. But I am telling you, there is a intelligence that when I've often wondered about if animals can imagine. I've looked at, for example, cats, dogs, various creatures, a lot of birds, squirrels, you know, and I've wondered what is their capacity to imagine. And even if they access a view, how much can they process it? We as human beings can process inner events. You know what that means? You know how many times in this life I've had moments where I've just been waiting, or waiting at the bus stop or on the subway or somewhere, where I've just been sitting and my eyes have been closed, and behind my eyes the world wasn't closed, the world was happening still. And it's like this kind of relationship with the known and the unknown, that it's as if the universe suddenly throws the unknown towards you and you got to confront that, and suddenly the universe throws the known towards you and you got to confront that. And at first you're kind of storifying everything that is thrown at you until you realize the reason it's being thrown, the reason challenges enter a person's life, is to align you. It's literally, you can say, suffering on this planet is the hammer of the universe. If the universe was a blacksmith trying to polish its own creation, trying to straighten out its evolutionary scheme. The poet Rumi, he has gone far in his metaphysics. He says, I died as a mineral, and I became a plant. I died as a plant and I rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. An evolution from the mineral kingdoms towards the animal kingdoms. And then Rumi says, why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? Why should I fear death? I shall die once more, to soar with angels blessed, but even from angelhood I must pass on to that which no mind has ever conceived. So we are now, as our species is being concerned with conception, its edge. 2020 is a time in history where human beings are wondering where the edge of their subjective conception is. Ludwig Wittgenstein says the limits of my language means the limits of my world. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, don't get involved in partial problems, but always take flight to where there is a free wheel over the whole single great problem, even if this view still is not a clear one. You see, life is so cool that when it happens, you really can't judge an event. You really can't judge something that's already happened. It's happened. And really, free will's ability comes in being conscious of inner events before these inner events externalize. It's strange, but because we're on a rock in the middle of nowhere, emotional stability is a crucial pillar for the maintenance and advancement of the civilization, in the sense that we have to assure each other's minds of their own existence. Life, beautifully, is like a mystery looking at itself in the mirror. You know, I've had moments in this life where I've perceived an inner event, and very remotely I've perceived an inner event, and externally a similar pattern of it has happened. That means sometimes I've got a sort of emotion that was out of place. Like throughout the day, imagine nothing's happened, you suddenly feel sad, you know? And then you go inevitably see something has happened. You know, and I've always wondered about the relationship of man with his world and the purity of it. And really, if man is classifying the world, is the world classifying man? Is the universe a separate phenomenon to itself, or is man a separate phenomenon to the universe? Or is the universe a separate phenomenon to man? In other words, is man seeing the world there, or is the world actually there? Many voices come and go. Many creatures on this planet have been named. Many names have been written in history. And many personalities never meet the light of day. We find ourselves in 2020 in a civilization that is not conscious of itself. And as the great commander of the inner realms, Carl Jung, said, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And it's another way of saying the greatest game, the greatest effort to put in this life is to see it, is to attempt to see it before the blur, before the dissonance. that we as beings must pilot our attention now, and we must pilot it not in just objective fields of existence, but subjective fields of experience, and the recognition of the simultaneity of space and matter, which is another way of saying that freedom and enslavement have always existed side by side, that their definitions were dependent on each other's archetypal stance, that many things come into value because they are here, and when they go, where was the value from the beginning? You know, as Rumi said in that poem of his, the evolution of the attention towards the inconceivable being, as if we are a conceivable doer moving towards the inconceivable being. Do you know? And so even Terence McKenna spoke about the transcendental object at the end of time, that it's as if the universe is a sort of novelty engine, and this novelty is speeding up, and it seems to be attracted, you know? And believe it or not, before I kind of got acquainted with Terence McKenna, I accessed the idea from a different angle, that I suddenly saw, like in my youth, I could tell you I had a sort of atmosphere of Eastern mysticism, Eastern Sufism around me, you know, in my youth. And that Eastern Sufism was a relationship where you kind of loved the world into truth. It was a sort of, the Sufi practice was a sort of bhakti yoga, believe it or not. That it is in a sort of love for the world where you forgive all the selves in that world. You know, that means if you for 1 second consider every human being you have ever seen in this life is a part of your world, and any human being that has ever been hurt, it is a testament to whether something has hurt your world. You see, there's a quote from Che Guevara, and he says something like, "You're a friend of mine if you tremor with indignation at every injustice." And what he meant there, Che Guevara, was that there are values greater than the individual conscious personality. That there are things that the human being can see, where it was the concept, you see, sacrifice, it can be seen in a lesser light if it is meaningless. It can be seen in a greater light if it is meaningful. And what does that mean? That means, for example, so many parents and people on this planet, they have sacrificed the dreams of their individual lives to develop the species collectively. You know, and that's a kind of art being missed. Parenthood is like an art form, you know? And if you were to see this art form, how it's being passed down from generations, it's moving towards the awareness of the individual. That means as the child is becoming smarter, the parent is requiring to teach less. Do you know, it's been like, I remember, I playfully wrote it in my poetry one night, that there had been so many, how can I say it, you know, beautiful women I had seen in my life who I was fond of, and I had in some sense kissed them in my mind first, you know, a sort of idea that as if you have accepted the nature of something, and that is the difficulty, you know, and especially in today's era where society is becoming high speed. Think of it this way: anytime the speed of a system increases, there's more collision. And it doesn't matter who the driver is, if the speed of something is increased and there hasn't come a sort of acquaintance with that speed through various centuries, then it would be collisions would occur, you know. For me, I had this feeling, you know, I felt in my youth, the world's, I kind of felt karmically rejected by the soul of the world that was my mind. I felt my mind had abandoned me. This was in my youth. And when I say my mind, was that it was a strange time where I had no thought. This was my whole. This was the great realization of my life. In my youth, I thought I didn't have imagination, and then when I woke up to the world, I realized it was all there. That as much as we can say an object has a subjective value, we can say a subject has an objective value. And when you look at the Abrahamic religion, the concept of heaven is a concept where it's a subject that has an objective value. It's like a mystery is promising you a certainty. And many belief systems, because the person emotionally opens up to the belief, they become sync with it. So what does that mean? That means a lot of people, they are not actually observing their beliefs. They were just pure young beings on this earth. They're in their childhood, and as they had their emotional intelligence develops first. When the emotional, it's like a child has different emotions going out through the day. Now, while the child is experiencing the world on an emotional level, language and subjective exposure, it's like various things that are happening to the child, and really its environment is becoming its identity. I think it's an advanced human being that its environment, the environment of the being, is not their identity. They are conscious that the environment is a life of its own. And so just because a person is in a room doesn't mean they're really in there. It doesn't mean the attention is there if the ears are open. The thing about uh, so guys, my attention is on the chat section. Omalka, when you say what you in the end, the concept is you only have you. In the inner realms it is true, but if there was only you, that would mean there would be no others. That would mean that the solipsist doesn't have to worry about truth because it's only you. Do you know that means it's actually the destruction of the concept of truth? Anytime, here's the thing, if we assume the standard way the universe is moving is dynamic, if we treat the world as a process, it becomes incredibly difficult to contain it in language. There's a quote I gotta read for you. It's from Ludwig Wittgenstein. I don't know if I read it, but I'll say it. He says, I didn't read it here. Philosophy is like trying to open a safe with a combination lock. Each adjustment of the dial seems to achieve nothing. Only when everything is in place does the door open. pretty much, guys, I think so. Jake in the chat section says something very nice. Tatvamasi, you're it. Um, Yeah, but there is something that if life is seen as a process, the you is not conceptual, is not objective. I'm saying that there's certain states of mind, certain ways human beings are alive, where there is no condition. Literally, it's like there is no morality is not in language because there was a time that language wasn't there. Linguistic professors say there was meaning before language. What does that mean? That means our caveman ancestors were like grunting at one another, even though it didn't mean anything, but there was meaning. There was something they wanted to share or communicate, right? When you see those ancient cave drawings, you know what that means? That means communication is evolution. Creativity is that there's a world behind your eyes and you're releasing it in front of your eyes. That's it. So for me, I'm noticing this, okay? If I see myself as a particle, I can symbolically attribute any subject to that particle. But if I see myself as a process, it's like, what kind of face can a cosmic process have? If it's like looking in the mirror and not just seeing yourself, seeing the whole cosmos happening. So what that means is the more life appears dynamic and as a process, the less we can be at a sort of ideological individual conscious position. So I'm noticing that as the speed of our attention to our as the speed of our self's movement in the stillness of our awareness, like when there's that honestly, I feel we're in Wonderland, but the lights are out, and our DNAs are flashlights. You know, and so it's like suddenly we're realizing unique roller coasters. So when Carl Jung realized when he spoke about the unconscious, the conscious, the collective unconscious, this was like a new roller coaster. And when you really look at life, man, people don't need answers. I'm telling you, people, you don't need an answer. Because an answer is like you were hungry in one moment, so you ate food. Somebody gave you food and you felt an answer in that moment. But the actual resolution is to live with the system. And when you, for example, in sociology, look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this dude is pretty much saying you're starting off with first requiring having certain needs as a human being to maintain your objective realm, as Mr. Within would say. So I would say, like, it's what it means is you're attending to your physical needs, then psychological needs. Then eventually you're going towards self-actualization. And you'll see that, imagine right now you were the best citizen. You did everything you could, and everything you did right. At the end of it, you will be waiting for the world's evolution. So the evolution of the individual actually leads inevitably to the evolution of the collective. So if we have a collective approach during an evolutionary individual conscious phase of our species, then we in some sense have bypassed our past by building the future. Bypass past identity. So you see it's like before the language, what was good, what was bad? Before the word good and bad, what was good, what was bad? Do you see? It was experiential. And so language is a lineage where a beacon of experience was passed down as a concept. And philosophers, their tasks were to look at those concepts and find some sort of, like, like restoring an ancient artifact, you sometimes find the quote of a philosopher in history, and you look at it and you kind of wonder, okay, this was a human being, and what did this human being see? So for me, philosophy only became interesting when I realized the eyes of others are holding worlds too. And because we have this materialistic perspective, It means people think that all their memories, perhaps at the time of physical transition, is gone. We think it's like a container, it's a jar, and when the jar breaks, the liquid in the container is gone. But what if the liquid in the container is not gone? What if there is an ocean? What if the story of humanity and the language that we have sparked on the surface of this earth like fire, we've discovered language like a technology. It's not, we're not creatures of, we're not the language. We use names, but how can you be your name? How can you be letters of an alphabet? You know, your actual experience of reality is not letters of an alphabet, but the letters of the alphabet are the subjective realm. And our species, for not being able to distinguish between the subjective and objective realm, it has meshed the two together. And what that means is the good and bad are seen as a person in one person. What I mean by that is right now, I call it Civilization 1.0. Okay, in 2020, right now, where I'm giving this talk. So, what is Civilization 1.0? It's a time where we look at each other on walking in the street and we're like, that's a good person, that's a bad person, that's a good person. We're cherry picking morality like our own paint. Imagine like when you see someone, the impression you get of them is actually your hand throwing paint at them. Okay, so you're painting the meaning there with attention. But the secrets of our attention transcend our beliefs. Beliefs are leaves on a tree, they change every season. Do you know how many beliefs you can have? You can literally, that's why they call it a market of ideas, because you can believe anything. You can look at a iced tea bottle and feel like that's you believe that to be the perfect blueprint for a spaceship. It's like, it's a belief can ascribe anything to anything. You can believe subjectively in a subject. Do you know? You can believe in a thought. That means the only way this idea of the whole Mr. Within channel occurred was because out of me being a person living my day-to-day life, there was one idea that came that stuck. It's like as if the idea was too important for me to leave it. And then that was a kind of intuitive preference. Let's just go with the go with the intuitive flow. And that's the thing. In trusting our intuition, we're awakening to the simultaneous potential of a civilization that, before being just completely defined by language, is actually being defined by the living reality of a field of intelligence. You know? When I began thinking of the mind as a field, it was such a breath of fresh air. It was like, how can a field die? How can a field live? So I noticed like it's as if like energy is appearing to itself in an image or in a format that, while it's in that format, it is considering it means temporary. Let me tell you guys, there is something that I felt I was missing out in my youth, and it was the recognition that there is nowhere else for you to be you other than now. That recognition, you don't know, because I'll tell you, like, Persian culture is remarkable. It's definitely misseen. It's not seen properly, but what it is, it's like, I remember in my youth, like, um, I had a very large family, like in Iran. Father's side and even mother's side, but mother's side were in Europe. Father's side, they were living in Iran. And so, I remember there was a, in my youth, there was a sort of, how can I tell you, religion. There was a sort of moral code of abidance and politeness that was universally acknowledged. That means when people spoke to each other on the street, there would be politeness as the first format, as if over exaggerated politeness or exaggerated artificial politeness was the norm of speech. Do you know? So what I remember, how can I tell you? It's as if me, my cousins, and my brother, we would all be playing in a room, and then suddenly, when like one of my uncles would enter the room to see us, we would all suddenly be in our best kind of discipline, artificial politeness, And when my uncle would leave the room, suddenly we'd all be back into our normal selves, right? So that artificial politeness was an emotional link. Okay, it was as if you are young and you're told to walk in a certain way, and you walk that certain way, and eventually you're expecting a little more certainty, but you come to uncertainty. And so life is beautiful because it gives you access to many colors. Can you imagine just every day waking up and it being a loop of the same day? That's weird. That's the most too much. Like, let me tell you, the only way a person can endure doing an action in a long time is if there is an element of novelty to every time they do it, or it gets boring. Do you know? That's why utopias are pretty boring. Do you know? Because it's like, okay, all right, it's a perfect machine. But what about evolution? And we realize we need chaos for the evolution of order, and we need order for the evolution of chaos. That means the yin yang symbol is like there's no other way. There's no other way for chaos and order to evolve. There has to be something to cause you to be something else, and there has to be a space between the sentences, and there has to be gaps in our conscious senses of self so that we feel multidimensional. Because it is such a fascinating situation. It's a return from an infinite fantasy back to an actuality. And that's the great human effort. That's the greatest effort of the mind. That's the game of the mind. The game of the mind, it's like the liquid state. It's neither a solid truth, and it's neither an empty illusion. Do you know? It's kind of like somewhere in the middle, where there's known factors and unknown factors, and the known factors tend to be an imposition of wakefulness. So I can tell you that when I attempted to reverse engineer my own ideological self in a moment back into its core, I came to realize its core was not dualistic. It was an instantaneous attention. That means I identify more with an attributeless, instantaneous kind of attention being the whole moment than a character in a story. I'm telling you, it's like I think after 25 years of life, the being should awaken to experience's value is because beyond the language threshold, your eyes are the only pilot. That's why I brought the concept of conscious piloting. That's why the world doesn't need yogis. It needs pilots. It needs beings who can administer attention not only on an individual conscious level, but also with an effort to explore the collective unconscious. So just the idea, guys, that when someone remembers something, imagine a nostalgic moment of your life. For example, when I was in the UK, Birmingham, I kind of had put myself into a mode of a lifestyle where I was just going to school, and then I was just, every second I had this urgency to just give endless talks. And let me tell you why. Because I had this idea to give 10,000, it suddenly appeared to me there's no point of counting. It's like when somebody wants to do 10,000 push-ups, trust me, it's like after some point you stop counting and it's just endless push-ups till the end of time. Because the number is so vast that you can't really over analyze actually, because you don't know. When you're honest, um, you can say the simulation vanishes. When you're dishonest, and if you take that dishonesty into your inner realms in regards to a kind of illusory desire to see beyond the veil, then that's careless. It's like, do you know what I mean? It's like you should only drive the vehicle if you're certain that you can handle the vehicle in all the potential ways that it may be required. You know, that means there's been times where how can I tell you, I've drone for 2 hours and I was very tired. You know, it was at night and I had to drive from Barrie to Toronto. I had taken my brother to uh, Barrie and I had to drive back. And it was at night, and it was a point where I was noticing. First of all, anytime you feel your eyes are closing when you're driving, do one thing. When I got like, this is how I kind of kept myself awake in front and trying to figure out what the best way to stay awake is. And I noticed that immediately you should take your back off the chair, off the back of the chair. So if you have to drive for a long time and you can't stop, let's say it's a situation like that, then you have to kind of like, your back shouldn't be, because the temperature of the seat and your back is creating some sort of coziness. You got to pretty much get rid of the cozy factor, like open the window to get the But anyways, just an awareness that you can handle the vehicle before navigating it. So your mind, imagine now, is the vehicle of a lifetime. It's the opportunity to experience biology's effort to, believe it or not, see what it is as a subject. I remember giving a talk called "When Your Subjects Become Your Subjects." And this idea, I still feel it's too. For me, something strange happened. The moment I recognized, I saw an animal that was alive, and that animal, I had managed to give it a concept. Then the concept I had given a living being was constantly tested in my mind and my subconscious, as if like, what if the concept is alive like the living being? What if language is alive? What if we see a squirrel jump from one branch to another? What if our neurons are alive? You know? And so I thought about that. And I thought about the implication of it, the necessity of it. Sometimes a person can see deeper dimensions, but they are not accessible. That means you can see, for example, like you don't have a phone, but you saw something remarkable in nature and you couldn't film it, but you saw it in that one moment. You know? In today's world, altering consciousness is entertainment. Is entertainment. We do it through media, we do it through information. You can say the first addiction that man had was to information. And addiction, maybe I should use a better word, the first attachment, the first tool man picked up was info. Man cared about how phenomena was informed. That's why we see geometry develop. That's why there's how do I forget the name? Euclid's book is like the bestseller beside the Bible. You know, what was it called? His book. I feel whenever your state of mind is altering, the consequence of it has nothing to do with per se. It's like a pilot where the pilot decides how the plane lands. When the pilot can decide how the plane lands, that means the alteration of consciousness is not just an objective relationship. I feel we're pretty much, human life is an attempt of an unknown collective field to move itself as known particles. And at the core of it, it's so beyond language that man will only appreciate what is beyond the language threshold. And I've given it like phase 3 of civilization 2.0. Sometimes in life, I feel, how can I forgive myself if I don't forgive the world in which this self has arose from? So many times I have had access to an out of body of thought. I've had an out of body experience, but not out of the physical body. The most out of body I've felt ever is just pretty much my mind is my whole moment. Literally, the most out of body I've felt is when I have no body. When all phenomena is one moment's intelligence, and then your inner realms roar, and then it's as if like a light from the clouds, has pierced through, and Thor's hammer is falling on the last needle of civilization's greatness. And so it's a situation where, I don't know, it's like we first have to free ourselves from what we are not, and then run towards what we can be. And I feel, I don't know how people can go about in their day not writing. For me, I'm trying to bring back writing, old school writing. What I mean by that is, there's a story of Friedrich Nietzsche that when this man reached a point where he had to use a typewriter, he couldn't use a pen anymore. His writing became cold and machine-like, as if he was writing when he was writing. Any person who has ever written on a typewriter really fast, it's as if they have heard machine gun bullets on a battlefield. You know what I mean? It made the writing of Friedrich Nietzsche cold when you change the format. But when a man picks up a pen, and when there's a piece of paper, and for the first time, that ink of that pen can release a world onto the emptiness. There's a joy in that. There's a joy when your inner realm salute you. When it's as if you befriend not your mind, but what is. What is surpasses any containment. And that's why I'm saying that our morality is the environment's abidance with the environment. That means before human morality, it was like feel out nature, do what you feel. You know what I mean? It's like bears are not thinking about like the philosophies of honey. Why honey exists. They're just going after it. Their morality is the process. What mankind is an effort of conscious vision. So it's the awareness to the strange is the divine. There's nothing more evolved than that. That's the uniquest clue that there is something off with our species than the others. Because they say the difference between man and animals is that animals are not aware of their mortality. That means animals do not know they're temporary. It's like a candle that doesn't care when it will go out. A candle flame that doesn't care when it will go out. But then it's like the human species, is a candle flame that is aware it will melt, because it's seeing other candle flames melt. And really, it's a symbiosis of being subjects to each other's minds. That means it's kind of fascinating. I think no one is ever seeing anyone, but we are simultaneously being energy conscious of itself. Because it's very hard to give a personality to energy. It's very hard to make the periodical table anthropomorphic. But the ancient periodic table of the four elements, earth, air, fire, water, and even ether, the fifth, those were animated. Those were the inspiration of legends. That means you know how I thought about mythology, ancient mythology? I sat down and I'm like, imagine, I thought, okay, imagine like 10,000 years from now, what if a poem I wrote became ancient mythology? What would that ancient mythology look like? So sometimes when you want to understand how something is, you try to create it. And that's a testament to how much you have actually seen the thing for what it is. You know, the moment I realized that there's many of the desires that my mind could fathom and want, there was a 50-50 chance that I would get them. I changed my strategy. And for the first time, in some sense, it was kind of intense, but you don't know. I have not just fought with friends and foes, but I have also fought with language. And what that means is an ideological system sometimes can impose a subcategory that is a deviation away from your own true nature. And in those times, there has to be a sort of inner war. So imagine, a child in a religious household, and that child, for example, doesn't see the same view. Now that child doesn't communicate it. It's a hidden dimension of their inner eyes, you know. But that hidden dimension is still there, and so it's as if the mind of man, I feel it's like this when this is pretty much life. If you want to think of it too long term, your intelligence throughout the day uses too much energy. If you think about it short term, with simpler patterns, think of it this way: anything that you understand, your intelligence is taking less energy to process. The brain has less work to do the more you understand, actually. And understanding, really, it's like we're standing under a universe and we're like, what is it? That what is it, which causes you, and this is very crucial because I'm not proud of this, but in middle school, I was open to the idea of, like, I didn't care for the educational system, so I didn't care for giving my own answers to problems. It was only when I realized that there's some problems my eyes see that nobody else sees, that are based on my inner realm, that only I can give an answer to and nobody else can. So then I'm like, I have no other choice than to study what is going on here. You know, it's easy to avoid. It's always easy to demolish a building rather than build it. Do you know, it takes a long time to record 300 talks, but when you see a hard drive thrown at a wall, at a door, you know, it's as if that 300 talks can get destroyed in an instant. So that, you know, life can sometimes move strangely. You know, sometimes when something appears to you as strange, it means either you require to change for it to become meaningful, or the world does. And if the person can't change themselves, what do? They change their world. If it's hard for someone to, for example, quit the inefficient, you know, they may begin devaluing the efficient. I feel we have to constantly just be warriors of our intellect. We have to care for our attention and how far or what it's authentically giving access to, and then use that somehow. It's one of those kind of ideas that keeps me up at night. It's like, for how long are we gonna believe in sandcastles and paper crowns? For how long? It's honestly like, again, matrix code on the screen. It's a mixture of various ways the inner realms of various beings are being shared in the outer realm. So it's not just we have to, as people, learn to live with one another on on this rock in the middle of nowhere, but also we have to learn for our inner realms to be tolerant of each other in their attempts to communicate and share. We pretty much have to we have to strengthen the mind of the civilization, and immediately the body becomes healthy. It's like a way of saying, regardless of the body's life, the mind is living honorably. Morio Oshiba, the founder of Aikido, the founder of throwing people in an ingenious way to the ground. He's such an epic guy. He says, create each day anew. And what does that mean? That means for all you truth seekers out there, you know, for all those people in the world searching for a truth, you gotta create it now. That's the era of advanced communication we're in. It's not enough anymore to worship language. It's not enough to just wear a mask of ideology and think that's just life. It's a dynamic thing. It's not George. It's Alfred Whitehead's process. It is Buckminster Fuller's verb. There's a story from the Vedic deity Rama. That it's as if some human being got tired one day and came to Rama and he's like, Rama, why do we have to work for all this enlightenment? Why do we have to work? You know? And Rama, who was a deity and also known as the archetype of the perfect man, he says such a metaphysical answer. Sorry guys, I gotta write something down. The human resource, or let me say, Rama looked at that guy and was like, listen up, buddy. He said the creatures and dimensions of evolution lesser than the human framework, and it was seen as, humanity was seen as the bottom of a mountain, Mount Meru, I think it was called, you know. And as if our human plane of existence and dimension is the bottom of a mountain, and there's higher realms, you know. There's greater skies, you know. So Rama says beings in lesser dimensions, they can't ask the question. They are too unevolved, too unconscious, too controlled by nature, too oblivious to life to ask the question. And then he said, the beings in the higher realms, the gods, they are getting so many offerings. They are so occupied with their achievements that they never need to ask the question. They're already, life is set. Life is set at a perfect speed, you know? It's like imperfection is the strangeness up there. So what I mean is that Rama was saying the lesser dimensional beings, beings in inferior dimensions, they can't ask the questions, and beings in higher dimensions already have an answer, so they don't need to ask the question. It is only in human life where there is the perfect ratio of chaos and order for the mind to function as an individual, and upon the recognition that we're on a rock in the middle of nowhere, and when you actually put a space between the W and the H, you're now here. Like, look at how playful language is. You know, nowhere is now here technically. You know? So in the middle of nowhere, our senses of how we're here now has come into form. We are pretty much setting the world into storification, into a sort of the linguistic simulation, the mass anthropomorphization or something. For me, it's really, life is it's an exchange of moments. So most people probably think that it's just moment to moment. Like, it's like you can see life as a line, like you draw a line on a piece of paper, or you can see it as an arrow. Imagine we draw an arrow on a piece of paper. All right, let me actually get a piece of paper. We tend to think that the human identity is so linear that we are a creature in a space-time continuum and time is moving forward. And as time moves forward, it is as if, how can I tell you, change is the breadth of the space-time continuum. So this line, when you draw a line on a piece of paper, a line is many tiny dots. And so a person, even like Heraclitus, that says no man can step in the same river twice, and it's not the same man, and it's not the same river. What does he mean? He means that every moment is a new moment. So it's like, instead of seeing life as a line for a character in a story, you can see every moment as a new self. Every moment is its own infinity, is its own dimension, you know? So you can. It's like seeing the tiny dots instead of a line. Do you know? Now the thing is, we tend to think these tiny dots don't have an animate relationship with one another. One thing that was, I don't know how miraculously I kind of noticed it, but it was so transformative. It was like, it was like it revolutionized my own writings. And it was the recognition that what if dimensions are alive, not just the people in the dimension? What if this world is alive and we've been treating it like as if it's not here? What if nature is where our minds were born and we have forgotten our home? And the technological revolution is the fight against nature. It is pretty much the greatest challenge of the natural being, to save itself from its own mistake of trapping itself in a technological box. There are many wars being fought simultaneously. You know, there's in certain New Age communities, they feel like there's this idea of like a galactic federation, and they think there's this idea of wars occurring in dimensions that we can't see beyond our clouds. But at the same time, let me tell you, there's so many ideological wars, and we are a system that has a chance to make itself extinct from the inside and the outside. If it's from the outside, we feel less guilty though. If it's like a natural disaster, we're like, oh, what you gonna do? You know, like it's a meteor. You know, great. You know, but if it's something where it's from the inside, where there was free wills. There was an ability for free will to attempt the situation a different way. It's like realizing you're piloting between different states of neurological, neurochemical containment, as if your mind was a jar. Every time you move, it's an alteration of your consciousness. How could it not be? How could novelty not be defined by change? So that means it's as if it's like the neurologist being like, all right, let's see how this neuron is becoming like a person who wants to buy like the next computer, like a new iPhone or something. You know, how do neurons become, you know, a poet? You know? That's the grand question, you know, that's the hard mystery, the hard problem of consciousness. How do neurons write poetry? So, I'm definitely gonna use that as a title for a talk. How do neurons write poetry? Knowledge is strangely a sort of anthropomorphization. You were constantly humanizing things, okay? And people, for example, we don't care about, we dehumanize instantly, and that's a flaw. Anytime, it's like whenever you see cruelty, that means you are seeing a creature that is being haunted by their own inner realms. Whenever you see external violence, that's like, violence is strange. Let me tell you why. Because you see, when you read history, you're like, look at how long it took for everything to be here. Are we going to just get rid of it because we feel violent? No, the inner realms are arrogant. So what that means is a person can be trapped by their inner realms if they feel life has to be what they only see. So that's why I'm saying, that's my whole thing. If you notice, it's like, sometimes I feel the reason I feel at ease sharing a lot It's because I observe the language. And when you observe your mind, it reveals to you its secrets. It's like even, what was his name? We brought up Ludwig Wittgenstein. Let's bring up Ludwig von Beethoven. And Beethoven was a remarkable guy. And he has this quote where he says, don't just practice your art, but force your way into its secrets. For it and knowledge can raise man to the divine. Raise men to the divine. And what it means is that it's another way of saying the art, though he says don't just practice your art, imagine the art is life. So he's saying don't just practice living, but force your way into its secrets, for it and knowledge, for that authentic effort, the access of the simple self towards the complex. You know, it's like there's nothing in life that is saying a human being has to be complex 24/7. And there's nothing saying in life that a human being has to be simple. And what that means is all preference is sentence structure written on void paper. It's all like either the subject is moving first or the object. If the subject moves first, reality feels like a simulation. If the object moves first, reality feels like a void because matter and space is no. How can atoms have a mind? You know what I mean? The world is a multidimensional place. What does that mean? That means we have to chill out with our language wars. Human beings have to step out of their belief bunkers and come and attempt to live in an advanced civilization because we only get one lifetime to do so. So right now, civilization 1.0 is not the civilization. It's not an efficient civilization. It's pretty much like a machine. It's like a fax machine. Our civilization right now, it's like, yeah, a fax machine is a certain level of progress, but not when 5G is coming out. So and I really hope 5G comes out, you know? Then it's gonna fix these stream issues. The purpose of life is the implementation of the intelligence given, really. I don't know what you can do much other than just be what you are. And it's like an instrument that every day you live, you're mastering your craft. That's the mindfulness, by the way. That's the Zen mindfulness. It's like when you see a Zen monk and you feel they're at ease. Let me tell you what that ease is. They are mindful. They're not rushing. They're not hurrying into the unknown. They have realized it's okay for just existence to be. That is the foundation. There's nothing wrong with existence. It was beautiful the way it was. But then it was experience. And was experience ugly? No. Experience was multidimensional. Suddenly we saw a person and we got an impression of them, and then you see that person another day and you get a different impression of them. And really what it is communication, is constant world remodeling and remodification, subjective realm, interior design, like pun intended. And guys, I'm telling you, for me, design is a crucial thing. Like, I'm gonna share something that I don't often share, but it's this artwork I drew, and I don't really remember its name, but I drew this in 2015, and I'm gonna explain to you a sort of thing where, hopefully, if time and fortune permit, I'm gonna, like, I don't know, starting a design school is like one of the coolest ideas for me. So here, I'm gonna show you. This is something that I I drew in 2015. I was looking outside the window of I had this table that was right connected to this window. I was looking out the window, and I kind of like the concept of boredom has kind of like faded for me. But it's one of those things where I was looking out the window, I had no preference, then an image of myself drawing appeared to me. And then I went with the inner realms. And so the system and the idea is that it's like life is a combination of chaos and order. That means in this life, imagine every person suddenly realize they have a designer degree. And they'll be like, whoa, how do I have this designer degree? You know, and suddenly, like, you know, the universe shouted back at the person, because you're a creature of design and you've been experiencing this design from the day one. So you see, it's as if your degree is the degree of experience. And experience has a chaotic side to the coin and an ordered one. So it's as if when you trust chaos and order, that's hyper speed and innovation, I think. So as if you draw something chaotic and then you give it order. Then you draw something chaotic, you give it order, or you draw something ordered and then you add something chaotic to it. And all of phenomena is actually is going through certain models, you know. It's like the world, even though Ludwig Wittgenstein said the limits of my language are the limits of my world, let me tell you, the world is not the limits of my language, you know. So in some sense, if we are technically the world naming itself, we have to just recognize that it's okay that we move towards a recognition of a sort of multidimensional, efficient vision. That's civilization. That means when you really think about it, like, think of it this way. As much as people are moving in thoughts, thoughts are moving in people. I feel once we acknowledge the subjective realm, the subjective evolution, suddenly all human beings, all arguments will have enough space to become efficient. That means the greatest error that man perhaps made was that he equated the known to the unknown, when the unknown was a process and the known was a particle. And I'm trying to think what would be like a practical example of a hidden command of a universal mind. It would probably be it would be it's very complex to word, but I would say a reverse engineering of Earth into paradise. Limitation into a state where the limitless can be approached in you. A hidden command of a universal mind is another way of saying the universal mind is moving itself, if the command is listened to. So, anyways, guys, I've kind of reached the end of the talk. Um, I think the acknowledgement that there is a life being lived behind your eyes, and the sort of synchronization of the inner and outer is really what honesty is. That means it's kind of like, as Beethoven said, when you force your way into the secrets of your art that you've been practicing. So what happens is it's as if you've been constantly getting new dimensions on the same action, and then you've reached a point where now you have no opinion and the action is just the action. And when you reach that state, you attain a certain level of mastery, but then a higher level of mastery from that is the mastery of the contentment with the void. And I don't know how many beings have attained that contentment. Because what it means is, it means right now we're experiencing ourselves as human psychology. It means at that point experiencing yourself not as a concept. And I don't know how many beings, how many people are if our species is ready for that. You know, I think inevitably when cyberspace culture sets in, it's going to be a question of, it's going to be like, let me tell you, a lot of the ancient mystical questions that didn't get answers to, cyberspace culture is going to answer. Cyberspace is you can say, um, the cyberspace culture is the scientific Vedanta. is the Vedanta of is the Vedanta of science. It's the Advaita of science. Yeah, the cyberspace culture is how can I tell you? It's so fascinating. Imagine like you going and seeing your favorite comedian. And when you go see your favorite comedian, it's like you're there to see the bit they do, you know. I don't know, like the metaphor is there's a space, there's phenomena in that space. Attention moves the phenomena in the space. Attention has been moving the phenomena as just an object. Attention has been moving the phenomena as an object that became a subject to itself. And this attention that has been moving as a subject, this long phase of language worship, eventually it comes to a sort of completion. When we prioritize direct experience, where we care for the unknown behind the eyes of every living being. That's the, I think that's the stepping stone to advanced civilization. Anyways, guys, I'm extremely exhausted. If anybody has questions, definitely ask. So Omalka says, "Do you have faith in Hinduism?" What does that mean? Let me tell you this. I don't have. I don't believe language can contain the truth, Omalka. So what that means is I don't like, truth is not a story for me. Hinduism is a story. Every ism is a story, is a setting. It's a certain cut out chunk of the subjective realms and infinitude. I don't know, guys. In case anybody has a question, they can ask now. But I'm gonna share something. I personally, I mean, like, I hope that when you hear these talks, I've done a good job. I think if the talk appears as a sort of mirror, that means the focus is on you wondering about what your own intelligence is. You know, it's like, yeah, human life is a Rubik's cube. Um, Beliefs of enlightenment is like the thought of a algorithm. We're trying to solve the puzzle of phenomena, and for me, there is I think every person has, I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but I feel when I've looked at my own shadow, there's a savageness I've seen in my, sometimes, how can I tell you, not external savageness, a savageness in my attitude towards the subject, because a subject doesn't have a consequence. Do you know? Sorry. I said that in a very strange way. Let me say it like this: a subject has a consequence, but it's like a subject, like an opinion on an object is different than an opinion, a subjective opinion on another subject. Do you know? So when it comes to the inner realms, the person has a very instant ability to shift it. When it comes to the outer realms, you gotta appreciate the flow of the moment. You know. Okay, so Jake asked the question: how useful do you find religion in getting to truth? I think that it's there are many eyes that are open. I feel that it's first of all, it's an incredible question, actually. And guys, I apologize beforehand for the uh, um, disturbed um, interruptions. Hopefully one day, you know, I kind of have a legitimate studio. But anyways, so let's see. Um, Religion is an algorithm. It's an algorithm that tends to be introduced at a young age. This algorithm that's introduced at a young age has its advantages. The Eastern, I could say, experiencing, I've kind of feel I've experienced both worlds, you know, and experiencing the sort of religious unity, there is a safety, you can say, of feeling. It's like it's a believe it or not, we are tribal creatures. We are social creatures. And what that means is we don't just look for ourselves for meaning, we look at our world for meaning, right? And sometimes in looking at our world for meaning, our attention can get caught on one thing in the world that we found meaning first. But the thing is, it doesn't mean it's devaluing the mystical, the transcendental, or even the notion of the creator. You see, in this world, what we actually see is everything that we're using, all the devices I'm using, every item, object right now has a design, for example. Do you know? And so it's like the concept of the designer is so profound because man asked the question in two ways. He asked, does the world have a designer? Concept of God came. He asked, am I designing myself? Concept of self came. Do you know? Do you see how fascinating that is? That means in wondering about the source of the world, the personification of that became a sort of creator archetype. Do you know? And the personification of the self became the individual, the creation. And what that means is there's a mode of looking at life like as if it's like going against the river. You're like, oh, life is pushing me every day. And there's a way of looking at life as if you're being pulled towards where you need to be. So I find that its religion, utility doesn't have to do with language per se. It has to do with perception's directness of experience, right? So what I mean by that is, uh, religion. First of all, we got to know something. We're living on an earth where it's a universal declaration of human right to have freedom of speech. What does that mean? That means you can't have freedom of speech if you don't have freedom of mind, and freedom of mind means everything is okay. So the Universal Declaration of Freedom of Speech is another way of saying that we are starting the system with an acknowledgement freedom first. Okay? So freedom is being acknowledged first. When there's freedom, now freedom has so much freedom to create for itself the lack of freedom. That means you are free to make a mistake in this life. The same way you're free not to. So there's a dimension of freedom. So when we're thinking about the utility of something, it comes to living life. And living life, it's starting off with freedom of expression. You're allowing yourself to move in space to get around, to survive. Right? So that means inner realms of freedom are being assumed. Like that means when you go get a glass from the let's say a glass from the cupboard to get a glass of water, okay? It's as if it's like when you go get the glass, it's like, you know, you don't feel like you don't doubt yourself. You don't plan for years. You don't sit down, build a strategy of how you're gonna grab that glass from the cupboard and pour yourself some water. It is so assumed in your domain of freedom that it is okay to do. And what is okay in your inner realms instantly can externalize. That means anytime I have felt, if you notice, anytime I feel a discomfort in my speech, I suddenly, how can I tell you, I suddenly revert to silent. Not revert, it's just like when you stop, you get a sense of how things were moving, you know? So I can say that for me, language is a simulation. And if you can find the simulation useful, then you are, you have found, if you can recycle a simulation into truth, then I would slow hand clap for divine genius, you know? Because it's right now it's a system, a complex system of definitions. When you see two people, like just Google like theist and atheist debates, and what you see is just language warfare. You know, it's like one person is shouting, "This is how the world looks like." The other person is shouting, "No, this is how the world looks like." And that one's shouting, "No, this is how the world looks like." And at the end of the day, we, the whole crowd in the world, are silently watching. It's like, what is this? So what I mean is something magnificent is that in all those debates, intense debates, at the end, they shake hands and the audience claps and the civilization advances. We are beyond discrimination. That means like I feel strangely sorry for the violent. And not sorry externally. Externally they may be abundant, but I'm saying internally, because of what you miss out on when you don't actually attempt to see how intelligence is working. And it's a cool journey. Every person, like your inner realms, nobody legitimately can comment on, believe it or not. So I don't know how there's cyberbullying going on in the world. How language can hurt someone. I can understand language can hurt someone if you feel they see the real you. I can totally understand that. But when someone can't see the real you, that means they haven't seen the general gravitation of your nature towards phenomena. Like how can I tell you? People have different sides to them. It's like weather. It's like, it's like the weather is like, can you really predict it? And psychology is like weather. Neurology, how a neuron leads to a subject, it's like weather. And what that means is different states appearing at different times, therefore rendering time void and new. So for me, it's like I am more inclined towards not uh, you know, uh, playing like language catch games where one person is throwing a language. How can I tell you? It's like there is something worth looking at here in this life, you know? But imagine when you're conscious, you're Jake, when you say you find it quite entertaining just throwing different concepts at each other, let me tell you this. Imagine now, instead of throwing, it was a performance of skill. Imagine an advanced civilization where skill is the value. And what skill is how much you've cared to implement the inner realms to the outer. That's why I'm saying, pretty much, I think, I hope everyone who listens to these talks, starts writing. Just write whatever that is you feel like throughout the day. It's too important to just let that vision go. And then the attempt eventually, like after a person writes a lot, you know what happens? You stop thinking about the pen in your hand. You start thinking then about the world in your mind, or how attention is beyond the thought, even beyond language. Befriend your inner realms and uh, 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 ride the skies of the seas of the seven skies. Um, so, anyways, guys, I feel we are sculpting language and attempting to filter it with the precision of objective evidence. I feel any system can become multidimensional the moment you add a dimension to it. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully, guys, I'm gonna try to. I'm on Patreon in School of Athens 2.0. I felt on this website called PayHip, like you can put digital files there. So I thought of maybe sharing some chapters of my science fiction there, maybe, or maybe just some stories. So, anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. And perhaps the true smile can arise when we only go forth. When, let me tell you, it's like forgiving the laws of the universe, which is simultaneously stopping the resistance to how your intelligence tried to be and is, namely. So, before being, uh, uh, it's like peace is there before you're in pieces. Much blessings and all, guys.